Right, hello everybody, Adam Clery from FourFourTwo, and Manchester City, can you believe it, are in crisis. And we have had so many messages being like, can you please do a video about why Manchester City are in crisis? So, here you go, that's the whole intro. Right, this is what Manchester City look like, in case you've forgotten. And before we start, if I may be permitted to be annoyingly normal about this, okay? They've lost 2 league games. That's it. Just 2 games in which they haven't won a game of football. Arsenal are on a run twice as long as that. It's only 1 more game than Liverpool's blip against Nottingham Forest. In the grand scheme of things, this is not an issue at all. But the problem is, right, it's Manchester City. And this never happens to Manchester City. But now, having been normal, I'm going to get really internet about this. I think what has caused all the drama, what's made this such a story, is that if you watch the game against Brighton, you could see this coming a mile off. They were excellent in the first half, but the longer that game went on, the more you thought, Brighton are going to batter them here. And I'm going to show you the momentum graph from this match. If you've never seen or used these before, they're like a combined measure of possession, passes, chances. It's basically who is doing what, and the higher the bar is sort of the more dangerous that is in relation to the opposition's goal. And very similar to the catastrophic loss against Sporting, Man City dominate the really early phases of the game. They get a goal, they get ahead, but then they cannot press that advantage. The momentum slowly turns to the point where they are completely on the back foot and lose all control of the game. In fact, such a good handle did Brighton get on that game. I'm even going to use an XG graph, which I never use because I can imagine how much that winds up people who don't use XG, right? From the start of the second half until Man City went behind, they created virtually no chances of note whatsoever. Like, all their second half XG is from like a panicked flurry of trying to equalise, not in normal play. Now this was Manchester City's starting 11 for that match, and it's up to you whether you think of this as a 4-1-4-1 or a 4-3-3. Either way, it lost control. Now what worked for them in the first half was that Brighton were using kind of like a 4-4-2 and had 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗏 and 𝗈𝗊𝗍𝗍 in the centre, and they could not live with City's 3 players. 𝗦𝗶𝗴Ｈ, who was largely really good, would drop off and then play through them if they tried to press him. Phil Foden would drift out of the flanks, go looking for the ball, and that would pull them around to try and chase after him. And Gundogan had a really good physical performance. People forget how strong he is. He would be in between them, but anytime they sort of tried to move on to him and get the ball, just bounce them off. But all of this changed at the start of the second half when Brighton brought on, I'm going to pretend I'm changing the counter there, 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗧, who is fantastic. If you do not know, then get to know. He competed in and won more ground duels in this match than any other player, despite only playing the second half. He dominated Man City. He was so much better at resisting the press, which meant that all of a sudden Brighton could start to play through Foden and Gundogan when they couldn't in the first half. He was athletic enough that he could go chasing after Foden and not let him have things all his own way. He was strong enough that all of a sudden Gundogan wasn't able to dominate in the centre. So all of a sudden, after not being able to do it at all really in the first half, Brighton could suddenly play out. They could break down City's attacks, and he was even pressing all the way up to Kovacic to make it harder for them to get out of their own half. Like, if you take the winning goal, for example, and you just back it up slightly, that is his pass through the very centre of Manchester City's midfield. But there are 2 other things in this goal that show you precisely the problems Manchester City keep finding themselves having as games are going on. First off, you look at this goal kick from Ederson. He bypasses both Lewis and Kovacic here and tries to go straight into Foden with a really difficult ball to get under control, which he loses, and then Brighton are able to bully Man City into getting it back. Strange. Almost as if they are missing a key player in that area. Strange. And neither of the 2 goals were particularly a surprise because there was loads of situations like this leading up to them. Like, Brighton in this one win 2 50-50s. They should probably score. And I just quickly, pause it here, just want you to take note of the defensive out-of-possession shape Manchester City are in right here. And that might look like a small thing, right? But that is Manchester City's in-possession shape. That is the 3-2 that they try to move into when they've got the ball. And they're here trying to defend in it, because while the ball's been turned over and Brighton have got possession back, they have not been able to successfully reorganise, and that smacks of a lack of leadership. But just to go back to Ederson's passing for a second, right? This is his passing map from the first half of the game, and you will see that when Man City had control of that midfield and they didn't feel too threatened by Brighton, he is able to get the ball into the area he is supposed to get it into. Like, a lot of it is sideways, yes, but when you've got someone like Ederson in goal and you are Man City, you want the ball to be sort of coming from him and landing about here. That is him starting a slow build-up attack. Goes along when he needs to, because he's a very good goalkeeper, but his primary focus is doing all this. But then, once Manchester City lost control of that midfield, this is his second half passing map. Now this one, all the way out here, I'm not going to shock you. That is the 98th minute when Man City were throwing everything forward. But in the 53 minutes leading up to that in that half, he only successfully put the ball into the build-up area of the midfield once, maybe twice. Like, even a few of these that look like they're vaguely in that sort of area, if you check the timestamps on them, they're 96 minutes, they're 92 minutes, they're 87 minutes. They're all after Manchester City went behind and Brighton dropped really, really deep. Like, they could get nothing successfully building up from the back once they lost control of the midfield, thanks to 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗥𝗔-𝗧𝗜𝗍. And no, I know what you're thinking. Are you going to do one of those I'm a believer gags like Alan Shearer did on Match of the Day, Adam? Is that the level you're operating at? And no, I'm not. I want to. God, I want to, but I'm not going to. But yes, anyway, sorry. The image I'm trying to paint is that Manchester City lose control of these areas as the game goes on. And another way this manifests itself is in their press. Again, focusing on 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗥𝗔-𝗧𝗜𝗍. Like, right here, they've actually set a really decent pressing trap. Like, Brighton give the ball to a midfielder who has nowhere to go. If it's back to 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏, that's not a great idea because De Bruyne is right behind him. If he goes back to the goalkeeper blind, he could just as easily play Haaland in. And better yet, most importantly, they've got these two players about to jump on him, so he has to do something. But what he does, and it's entirely your own judgment whether you see this as being an amazing thing for Brighton or just a terrible thing for Man City, is he spins the pair of them like they're not even there and then bashes into Kovacic, knocks past him and drives the entire team and the entire game up the other end of the pitch. And that came mere seconds after City had set a pretty good pressing trap. So you're getting the idea, right? As these games have gone on, despite the fact Manchester City have started really well and still have unbelievable quality across the pitch, they eventually lose control of the midfield, which means it's really hard for them to build out from the back, and it's really hard for them to get their press going, and thus they sit back and inevitably concede. Now, the reason that happened against Brighton was Carlos 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏. He had an absolutely unbelievable match, and if Brighton hadn't subbed him on, City probably would have gone on and won that comfortably. But why is it happening in every game? Well, the very short answer is that teams now have the courage or the bravery or whatever to try and get at Man City in the transition, because that's where they're most vulnerable. Like, Pep has been doing this for a couple of seasons. City use one number 6, usually Rodri, but right now it's Kovacic, and then someone from the defence comes inside and sits in a 3-2. Now, John Stones was stepping up, Akanji's done it before, Rico Lewis, but basically whoever it is, they end up in this shape. Now, at the risk of this video getting very 2002, there's loads of reasons why Manchester City like doing it. One is it gives them a box midfield, so they outnumber teams that have 2 or 3 in this area. It still allows them loads of width, so they can stretch teams, the 8s can then get in, they back up the press really well, it's quite nicely covered, yada yada, etc, etc. But it's not the shape they want to defend in. When they lose the ball and the opposition are in the sort of position where they can launch a counter-attack, they want to be getting back into a back 4. But the problem with that is it requires a lot of organisation and coordination. And literally the very first thing Brighton do after they've made this substitution at half-time is they turn the ball over, they work it out wide, and they get into this sort of gap that forms behind Rico Lewis. Because you can imagine if you haven't got the timing quite right, this defender ends up tucking inside because he's supposed to be one of the central centre-backs, but if your inverted midfielder hasn't got back across yet, that can leave a big gap. And Brighton got in there within a matter of seconds. Then just a couple of minutes later, the really big first chance they had, that is again targeting the back post. They get to the byline, they go wide, they run at Manchester City, they get the cross all the way over to that side, they get at Rico Lewis's area, and 2 players have a more or less uncontested header. And again, what this all comes down to is a total lack of leadership and organisation from Manchester City at the back. So for the equaliser, they've dropped into a 4-4-2. You can see it here. It's the most solid, rigid, hard to break down shape in football. But you see, the thing about 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏, one of the main components of how he likes to play football, is this idea of like abandoning the midfield when you work it into the final third. Like, it's sort of the exact opposite principle to 4-4-2, which is get small, get compact, get in the middle of the pitch, stop anybody playing through you. And it basically just says, well, we can't play through there, so why would anyone be there? And if we chuck a little grid over Brighton's attack at this stage, sort of relative to the 4-4-2, there isn't anybody there. Nobody's standing in the congested area because it's the congested area. And now not only is there not a single Brighton player in the middle of the pitch for them to mark, they've now got a 5v4 across the back line. And just before we roll the rest of this, I have to say 5v4s aren't necessarily that uncommon. Manchester City manufacture them all the time. They're okay to defend, provided you organise. But the problem here is not only is there a 5v4 off the ball, there is zero pressure now on the ball. None of the Manchester City team want to go out there and stop something happening. And thus, inevitably, because of that overload, City get dragged onto the wrong players. They leave this enormous gap between Walker and 𝗕𝗫𝗏. And I have seen Walker getting criticised for that, like he should have gone over there originally, but if you just wind that back to when the pass is made, that is, I can never remember how old he is, like a 5-year-old centre-back in front of him marking João Pedro, and that's the direction he's looking. I think he's probably right to be getting drawn that way, I think. But regardless, because of that space that's manufactured and the fact they don't get out to them, the ball ends up in this almighty scramble in front of Manchester City's goal, and it's a Brighton player that gets it first. And what is notable to me about this scramble is if you look at the bodies on the line for Manchester City, it is Núñez, it is Lewis, it is Simpson-Pusey. Like, it is not Ake, it is not Diaz, it is not Akanji, it is not Stones, and it's not Rodri either. Like, those are still excellent players in their own right, but when you think about the physical profile, like the ability to defend and put your body on the line, they're not the same players by any stretch of the imagination. So now, you look at that scramble and the fact that Brighton got the goal out from it, and you zoom all the way out, and you see the bigger picture. They're not competing for that one ball loose in their box particularly well, but also they're not organising their press correctly. They're getting caught in transition when players are in the wrong sort of areas. They're losing control of the midfield. But like, of course they are. Like, this is the back five against Brighton. And what have you got here? You've got two kids who can't be expected to be taking the responsibility. You've got 𝗕𝗏𝗏, who spent most of the season in the opposition's box. You've got celebrity shagger Kyle Walker and the actually very good, but clearly not Ballon d'Or winning Rodri, Mateo Kovacic. Like, it's not some secret hack other teams discovered, some really weird tactical thing they're doing. They're just vulnerable because that is a far more vulnerable base. Like, just look at Brighton's winning goal. Like, this is right before the pass comes in. Look how compact and how narrow that entire back four is. I've never, ever, ever seen a good team defending ever do anything like that. Never mind Manchester City. Like, that is an insane image to be looking at. Look how much space the wide players have. And the really mad thing is, if you showed that to anybody and says, guess where this pass goes, you'd be like, well, clearly to one of those two out wide. And yet still, somehow, they play right through the middle of them. There's, again, not enough pressure on the ball. Rico Lewis is not strong enough to make this run difficult. 𝗕𝗏𝗏 is not switched on and organised enough to cut out the pass, and he just waltzes through the centre of Manchester City's defence. In a moment like this, more than anywhere else, is where they miss Rodri. Because I can't keep saying this enough, I do really rate Kovacic. I think he's done a really passable job being dropped into that situation, but the decision he makes here does nothing for Manchester City. When that ball's about to come in, Kovacic has two options. Either cut out this passing lane, which is probably what most people would do, or, because Pedro's now dropped off the defenders, you grab a hold of him, you get touch tight, and you mark him man for man. And what he ends up doing in reality is just sort of like neither or both. Like, he sort of gets drawn towards Pedro, but doesn't really take him out of the equation, and in doing so, he leaves enough room for a very good and accurate pass. And then, of course, this is the age-old problem with defending. When a player gets caught between two different things, they end up doing neither, because when that pass comes in, Kovacic just sort of watches it, and allows Pedro to run in behind him. And you wind that situation back far enough, what do you find? Brighton have a 5v4 against Manchester City in the final third that they're not organising around, and nobody has the cojones to go out and press 𝗕𝗓𝗓. They lost control of their press, they lacked the organisation at the back. This keeps happening. And the thing is, I know the result against Sporting looked really bad, 4-1, but people have been quick to point out that the performance wasn't anywhere near that. Like, it wasn't a 4-1 game at all. City should have been out of sight. They missed a penalty. They just got stung with these counter-attacks. But the problem, how this manifests itself in a game like that, is it was clear to anybody watching it that having Lewis and Simpson-Pusey on the same side was madness. Like, Lewis was inverting and leaving him completely vulnerable, and they were putting one of the most deadly strikers in Europe right on him. And nobody on the pitch took responsibility for that and reorganised it. I really wish I had a more enlightening or interesting point to make in this video than Manchester City without Diaz and Stones and Ake and Akanji and Rodri are not as good as they are with them. But that's it. It's not that Guardiola's gone mad. They're still a very, very good team. They just are a team of good players. And when you don't have those good players, you're not a good team. It's really simple football sometimes. And that's it. That's all I've got for you. Like, Manchester City will get these players back, and when they do, they'll look loads better than they currently do. The question just is, has the title race gone by that point? I would say no, given this is a team who've proved they're capable of going on like endless winning runs, and Liverpool are still a work in progress, may get found out, may lose one or two players to injury. So it's all still to play for. It's just, we don't expect to see this. Like, I'm not a Manchester City fan. I have to watch them with covetous, jealous eyes at how successful they are. And the idea of them losing 4 games in a row... Actually, I'll make a bet with you, right? When Man City get all their best players back, watch Pep just invent an entire new formation. Do something mad tactically just to prove he's still got it. Until that does happen, though, and I'm absolutely certain that it will, you can subscribe to FourFourTwo. I keep forgetting to plug that right at the end of the videos. We love new subscribers. They grow, and it shows that we're doing the good things right and the right things good, and you'll never miss a video. Not that you should. Sound like Dr. Zeus. You can get me across all the socials at Adam Clery, Clery, and the FourFourTwo socials there in the corner of the video. But until next time, that is it from me, and that is it from Manchester City, but that is not it for their title aspirations. That had something to it, that. I think that works. I'll stop talking now.